Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's District Administration web seminar, which is entitled 3 Key Strategies to Promote Positive Mental Health for School Staff, which is brought to you by the generous support of our sponsor, Navigate 360. Before we get started, I would just like to share just a few housekeeping items with you all. For technical support, please use the chat panel, which you can find on the right side of your screen. Then select on my name, which is Stephen Blackburn, or host, and type your message if you're having any technical issues, and I should get to you as soon as possible. If you don't have computer speakers, or maybe you prefer to listen privately, please just dial the phone number and access code that I will be posting in the chat window momentarily, so look out for that if you're having problems. Today for this web seminar, we'll also be welcoming any questions that you have today with a Q&A session that will take place at the end of the presentation. To submit your questions, please use the Q&A panel, which you can also find like the chat panel at the bottom right side of your screen, and then send all your questions to all panelists, which is the default option. If for whatever reason you don't see the chat or the Q&A panels, please just look to the right of your screen again and then click on the expand triangle, which should be located directly in front of the panel name to make sure you have access to it. Also, something important to note really quickly, if you would like to access the web seminar at a later time, you'll be pleased to note that everyone who registered and who is attending today will receive an email with a link to the slide and an archive recording. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce to you all our speakers today. We have Dr. Scott Poland, who is the Director of the Suicide and Violence Prevention Office at Nova Southeastern University, as well as Michelle Gay, who is the founder and executive director of Safe and Sound Schools. But first, let me hand this off to Shannon Zaire, who is the managing director over at Navigate 360 for a few quick words. Hi, Shannon, you ready to go?
Hi, Stephen. Thank you so much, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Shannon Zaire, and I am a Director of Marketing at Navigate 360. And I just wanted to take a quick minute to introduce, of course, our speakers, but also Navigate 360. So our organization was formed in April 2020, and we now represent the synergy of expertise and experience of decades working with K-12 districts across the United States. You may have known us as any one or more of the following companies, including Alice Training, Safe Plans, Navigate Prepared, P3 Anonymous Tip Reporting, Social Sentinel Language Analytics, or Evolution Lab Social Emotional Curriculum. So together and going forward, we are Navigate 360, covering all aspects of safety, from prevention through recovery, and building safer tomorrows physically, socially, and emotionally. So on behalf of our entire organization, I am so thrilled to extend our partnership with these two amazing people. And I forgot to move the slides. Apologies for that. Too many things at once. You'd think I'd have the Zoom thing figured out already, right? So anyway, our folks who are joining us today, Michelle Gay, first of all, is one of the most exceptional people I have the privilege of knowing. Honestly, I admire her courage, grace, and determination. And in certain situations, I find myself wondering, what would Michelle do? She's such a fine example. Beyond being a delightful person, she is also the co-founder and executive director of Safe and Sound Schools. We have had the pleasure of supporting her organization from the very beginning and have watched her and her team grow, evolve, and make a tremendously positive impact on school safety. I am thrilled she is able to join us today and share her perspective as both a former school teacher and an industry thought leader on the importance of mental health care for school staff. Now, Dr. Poland, I have known for far less time, but he grows on you rather quickly. I always look forward to our conversations because he typically makes me laugh and I always learn something. Currently, among a couple of other projects on his plate, Scott is working with our product development team to incorporate suicide assessment and suicide prevention training curriculum into our solution suite. Other than that, I think he pretty much just plays golf. But seriously, Dr. Poland is a professor at the College of Psychology and the director of the Suicide and Violence Prevention Office at Nova Southeastern University in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He is a licensed psychologist and is an internationally recognized expert on school safety, youth suicide, self-injury, bullying, school crisis prevention and intervention, threat assessment, and parenting in challenging times. Parenting in challenging times. I bet many of us would like to have you come and help us parent during these challenging times. He has authored or co-authored 5 books and many chapters and articles on these subjects and has served as a legal expert in a number of lawsuits. Suffice it to say, Dr. Poland is pretty well qualified to speak on our topic today. So from here, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Michelle and have her share a bit about Safe and Sound Schools and tee some things up here for Dr. Poland. And then she will come back and have a little bit of dialogue between her and Scott, and then we will open it up to your questions. So with that, I will pass the baton over to you, Michelle.
To kick off today's webinar with Scott and share with you how important today's topic is with me, not only in my role as a national school safety advocate, but as a former elementary school teacher. I co-founded the national nonprofit that is ours, Safe and Sound. See if I can get the slides to advance here. Hang on. Look at that. Okay. I co-founded Safe and Sound in the aftermath of the loss that we suffered in Sandy Hook. I lost my first grade daughter, Josephine, that day in the Sandy Hook school tragedy of 2012. And in the 8 years, since that tragedy, we've built a legacy around this mission. This mission that we have of Safe and Sound is one that involves all hands on deck, and lots of people like Scott. We provide research-based education, tools, and resources to support crisis prevention, response, and recovery to protect every school and every student every day. So that's a lot, right? It's a lofty goal, lofty mission. And I'm pleased to say that we've been able to do that with great support, as you heard from Navigate 360 and many great leaders like Dr. Poland. Scott, in fact, came to see me in Newtown very shortly after the tragedy, very early on, to offer his support. And he's been a great supporter and friend to me, as well as the organization, and is an advisor and presenter for us at Safe and Sound. So it's wonderful to be with a lot of old friends here today. We look at safety altogether through a very comprehensive framework, a comprehensive lens. And we'll drill down into areas through Scott's presentation today that will touch on a lot of these key domains of school safety. But I would invite you to check us out at Safe and Sound Schools, learn a little bit about our approach to school safety. I think for many of us in the field, it is tempting to look for a quick fix, a magic pill, one program, one piece of technology or solution that can fix school safety for all of us, for all of our communities. But as we all know, I think everybody here with us today knows, it's just not that simple. There's a lot to ensuring that our schools are safe and sound, and it involves all hands on deck. And it will take all of these things and attention to all of them in balance. So please do, after the webinar, take a little time, visit us at Safe and Sound Schools and delve into the many resources that we have collected, the programs that we have curated and even developed ourselves. And of course, you can find Scott there as well. So today's topic is especially important, I think, for many of us that serve in schools and in communities. for the many of us that are working to keep schools and communities safe, this is something that we have to focus on, taking care of ourselves, taking care of each other, but ever more so in today's very challenging pandemic environment. When we talk about positive mental health and self-care for staff, we often pull out the old analogy of the oxygen mask. It's very well loved. We all talk about it. And, it makes sense. You gotta put the mask on yourself first, take care of yourself first before you can take care of those that you are supposed to be taking care of. And I think we all buy into that, and we all kind of nod our heads when the presenter says that. But it's just so much harder for most of us, I think, in practice. Maybe it's a DNA thing, but as public servants, and many of us leaders, we don't often do such a great job of modeling those best practices. And if they're not modeled at the top, unfortunately, that trickles down to all of the staff members, all of those public servants, all of those folks that are working within the community, and taking care of our most precious children. So I really look forward, and I'm sure many of you do too. We had so many people sign up for today's webinar because I think it is just such a critical issue at this time and always. And Scott, we look to you to walk us through some key reminders and some key strategies that will help us through this very challenging time, and hopefully that will help us well beyond. Throughout Scott's presentation, I encourage you all to submit questions and thoughts using the chat feature. I will do my best to organize them, and then I'll rejoin everyone after Scott's presentation for a little discussion and Q&A. So please don't forget to be thinking about questions and comments, things that we can add to our discussion. So having shared all of that, I am going to pass on to the main act here and let Scott share with us 3 key strategies to promote positive mental health for school staff. So the time
Thank you so much.
Is yours.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Thank you very much, Shannon. It's certainly a pleasure to work with both of you. And, there's a lot to be concerned about right now. And the bottom line is that many of us may even be suffering from a low-grade depression. Sadly, the vaccine is not available to that many people as yet. I think only about 9% of our total population has been vaccinated. When I made this slide a little over a week ago, it was 410,000 Americans that had died from the virus. And I believe that it's now 450,000 Americans that have died. And some of the surveys have said 1/3 of us actually know somebody who died as a result of the virus. And it's affected lots of staff members. It's affected lots of families. It's affected lots of students. And in some ways, Maslow was the guy that had it right. He was the guy with the pyramid theory. What's at the foundation of that pyramid theory? Safety and security for all of us. So there's a lot of fear and anxiety. Somehow I doubt I'm the only person that sometimes wakes up at 4 a.m. in the morning thinking about this world we live in, and I can't get back to sleep. We know we've had a very contentious election. We've had some of the most unrest we've ever had politically in our country. We've had a lot of racial unrest, and it is critically important that we take care of ourselves. And I, like Michelle, had always sort of listened about, okay, self-care is important, but do I really need it? And I think we all need it, given everything that's going on in this world. And in my classes and in my work, sometimes when I ask people about mental health, you know what they immediately start talking about? They start talking about mental illness. And the bottom line is mental health is a general state of well-being where we're able to cope reasonably with the ups and downs of life. We're productive, whether we're a student, whether we're a staff member in a workplace. We're able to get along with our families. We're able to essentially be balancing things that are in our lives, and hopefully we're also very involved and productive in our community. But all of that has been so much more difficult during this pandemic. And I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one that's tired of it. Didn't you think it would have all gone away by now and we'd be back to some sense of normalcy? And I've tried to use simply the word calm and take every letter in that word to stand for something that's important to all of us right now. Certainly try to stay calm and try to stay in the moment. Try not to worry about things that haven't even happened yet. Think about what we can control. And of course, for administrators, it's incredibly important to just check in and communicate with our staff members. The bottom line, everybody has a story to tell about how this pandemic has affected them. And we need to always provide some of those opportunities and truly listen. If I had to talk about a couple of key things today, we need, first of all, to all get a lot more sleep, because when we have proper rest, we can simply deal with stress a lot better. But we also need to be careful not to say these two words, I understand. We have a tendency to say that way too quickly. Have you ever spent 15 minutes telling somebody how they don't understand? Because that never actually happened to them. We also have a tendency to want to tell everybody it will be okay. And especially when there's been a significant loss, it's never going to be okay. It's a matter of learning to live with it. As one survivor said, trying to keep the grief in its own lane so it does not consume my entire life. You know, the A could stand for so many things, but hopefully as administrators, you're always available to talk with your staff and maybe most importantly, listen to your staff, and always available to listen to those in your family and to reach out to your coworkers at school. And the L could stand for many things, but I want to stress limiting the news. To be honest, seeing the overwhelmed ICU places in our hospitals, seeing more stories about people that didn't get to say goodbye to their loved ones, or the couple married for 50 years dying a few hours apart. I can take that, but only when I'm reading news where I have a choice. So I convinced my partner, we're not watching the news in the morning anymore. We're getting out of the house and we're taking our dogs for a walk. And that has helped our attitudes immensely. And then the M, modeling and management, are two critical terms. Hopefully administrators are modeling coping for their staff members. Hopefully teachers and parents are modeling coping and optimism for the future with all of their students and children, and simply managing our emotions. Although in some ways, I think it's important that I stress we need to lower the bar a bit. Everybody has made mistakes during this pandemic. Everybody has overreacted at times, and we simply need to apologize and say, I wished I would have handled that better, and I will be handling things better in the future. And I think we have to lower the bar some academically. What do I mean by that? It's just we have to adjust some things and recognizing what our children have gone through. And around the country, there's such diversity. I was working with schools in West Texas last week. They have had everybody back on campus for months. Right now, I'm working with schools in Baltimore where basically nobody has come back to school. And sadly, technology and virtual learning has really exposed there's quite a divide between what some children have in terms of technology access, or their parents' ability to create a little learning pod, or their parents' ability to really help them through all that virtual learning. So we just always need to respond to children with patience, tolerance, structure, and love. And I've tried to look back on my extensive experience responding, unfortunately, to tragedies like school shootings and clusters of youth suicide. And the main point is truly be there to listen. help me to understand. You know, if there were magic words to say to somebody, I would certainly share them today. But it's really as simple. I am here to listen anytime you want to talk. You know, I'm proud to tell you from the city of Parkland, I got the Helping Parkland Heal Award, my work with the parents. But I really had a pretty simple message to those parents. It was, when a kid lives in a stable home, when they're shown unconditional love every day, every way by their parents, they can overcome almost anything. But let's be honest, not every kid lives in a stable home. Some of them feel in the middle every day with issues between their parents over separation and divorce. And to be honest, every child makes mistakes. We simply need to always be clear to separate the mistakes, the misbehavior, because their worth as a person, our love for them should never, ever be in question. And the quarantine, you know, it went well for some children. Their families really increased the empathetic bonds. They developed new traditions. But I'd be naive to think that was the case for every family. There's some indications that things like domestic violence, child abuse, substance abuse, even gun ownership all went up during this pandemic. And what are the keys to bouncing back? Because resiliency is really a learned behavior. When you're surrounded by loving and caring family and friends, you do better. When you're optimistic about the future, when you utilize problem-solving skills, when you have the opportunity to vent strong emotions, those are the things that help us be resilient in the face of adversity. Oh, and it looks like I pretty much remembered every single one of those, but it's important for you to be able to see those. And I want to ask you for a moment to think about this. Seek out the people in your workplace that are positive and encouraging. Seek out the people in your support network that are positive and encouraging, and be that person for your coworkers, your family, and your friends. The anxiety really falls into two types. We're fearful of catching it. We're aware that so many Americans have died. We read stories of people that they recovered, but they're having long-term adverse effects because of it. So that is a very real fear for all of us. And I wish I could make, with a magic wand, make everybody be able to get a first vaccine and a second vaccine immediately. I'm very fortunate. Obviously, it's because of my age, but I got my second vaccine today. And it just gives you a little more optimistic view of the world to know that, thankfully, with 2 vaccines, there's very little chance that you're ever going to end up in a hospital. Secondly, we all have a fear academically. Our children have lost a lot, although, frankly, there are some children, and I think it's a very few, who basically have thrived with virtual learning. But that's not the case for most students. They really want to be in a classroom with teachers. And a project I'm working on with the high school in Colorado, some of those kids that have been virtual for months and months, they're a little desperate to get back to school and be with their friends. So yes, some children are significantly behind. And I have great confidence in our teachers and our schools, and I believe educators have done and will continue to do extraordinary things to help students. But we might have to adjust a few expectations, whether it be for our own child or whether it would be for students in our classes. And by the way, those Colorado high school students, they said, why don't they make the homework self-care? Boy, sometimes it's as simple as ask kids and they've got a great idea. And managing stress, I already talked earlier about concentrate on the moment. I know for me, staying busy has been very helpful. And remember, we can choose how we respond to things, and we can work to increase our connections to our coworkers and our family and our neighbors, and use all of that technology to stay up with extended family and friends. And we could even set aside a worry time. So what I mean by that, you could say to yourself, as the worries start to come to you during the day, between 7 and 7:30 tonight, that's what I will focus on, nothing else. But right now, I'm going to concentrate on what is in front of me. And hopefully, we begin every meeting and every interaction with someone by focusing on some positive things, and also letting them have the opportunity to talk about what they might be experiencing right now in the way of stress. And where does it come from, by the way? This cycle of normal stress from our workplace, from our family. We get tired. We could even get overwhelmed. And what is self-care that I'm stressing is so needed for all of us. Physically, it has to do with things with just eating properly, good nutrition, getting the proper amount of exercise and rest, as well as just doing the things that help us normally. You know, in my previous job, where I directed psych services for the third largest school district in Texas for a quarter century, I was often asked to help a troubled employee. The principal would contact me and tell me that a staff member is experiencing something really difficult. I mean, I'm not going to walk away. I'm going to say, of course I'll talk to them. You know, it'd be best if they sought me out in my office and we could have a private conversation. But when I would hear about the stress the employee was under, and when I would gently ask a question that I think is really important, who or what has helped you when you've had to deal with sad and difficult things before? And I'd usually get typical answers like family, faith, friends, exercise, I garden, I like to paint, I like to get out tools and work in the garage. And then I would say, well, have you done any of those things since your partner left you 3 days ago? And too often I would hear, no, I don't have the energy to do those things. But they're more important now than ever before. And again, we need to let some things go, not be self-critical of ourselves, find those creative outlets. I know my partner discovered paint by numbers, and they are really cranking out some beautiful paintings, and it's turned out to be something very relaxing for them. And then there's the spiritual side of all of this. Many of you are very involved in places of worship, the temple, the mosque, the church, but not everybody is attending church regularly. And of course, the isolation of the pandemic actually resulted in lots of people not going to places of worship for a considerable period of time. But there's another side of spiritual self-care. That's just living by a set of values that I believe are really important, which is showing compassion and kindness to others, truly being empathetic, finding ways to help other people, and just being respectful of everyone and their religion as well as their race. You know, actually, I have a quote here from Gandhi. It's so important. I always like to look at it and make sure I get it right. Gandhi said, our ability to reach unity in diversity will be both the beauty and the test of our civilization. And that continues to this day. And it's so important that we find the beauty and the unity in the diversity in our country. So those are a few key things about self-care, as well as the importance of getting outside, embracing nature, and again, being that positive person for your staff, for your coworkers, and for your family. And then we need to use more of these I can statements as we address all the important things about self-care. So please think about the I can things that you can do with regards to taking care of yourself and doing things that you know are good for you. And what I would hope is that as an administrator, you talk about self-care. Find some time in staff meetings. Maybe you share some of these I can statements that you utilize. And even for a small child, you could get out the poster boards, put a picture of the 7-year-old in the middle, or have them draw themselves, and then around that circle, they can draw the things they can do to eat healthy, exercise, be happy, and very importantly, help other people. By the way, one of my favorite quotes for adolescents is this one. Perhaps the only way an adolescent can truly find themselves is through service to other people. You know, serving other people, providing meaning in our lives. And by the way, Michelle Gay is an example of someone who, out of a devastating tragedy, has found meaning in everything she and Alyssa Parker are doing with safe and sound schools. So take just a moment and think about, as I went over those components of self-care, what else could you be doing? And also, please speak up and let your coworkers and your family know what you need for them to help you in this very difficult time. Now, what I'm known for is that I've been working on suicide prevention in schools in our country for 40 years. And I could talk about this subject for a very long time. Somehow I doubt I'm the only person here today that lost a loved one to suicide. I was 25 when my father died by suicide. I'm a good example of somebody that never thought it could happen in my family, had no idea these things that he was telling me, that they were truly warning signs of suicide. So prior to the pandemic, our suicide rate in America was at the highest number in 50 years. You see some statistics there. 10th leading cause of death for all Americans. Second leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 10 and 34. Dramatic increases in suicide rates for middle school age students as well as young Black children. Guns are involved in 50% of the suicides in our country, yet they're only actually used in 5% of the attempts. And please know, I'm not here today to question any adult's right to own a gun. I'm simply going to say, with that comes a responsibility to safeguard that gun from a troubled, angry, depressed, substance abusing, mentally ill person that might reside in your very own home. And looking at just a few more things. Isolation is an extremely strong predictor of suicide, along with untreated or undertreated mental illness. And many of us have experienced isolation from extended family and places of worship, maybe even now for many months. And many of us actually lost a loved one to suicide, and many Americans lost a loved one to the pandemic. And although they were not super close, one of my colleagues here at the university sadly died from COVID. One of my former tennis doubles partners died from COVID. So I'm certainly someone who knew people well that died from the virus. And then, is there a history lesson we can look to in terms of suicide rates? Well, yes, unfortunately there is. The Spanish flu resulted in suicide rates going up. The crash of the stock market, same thing. High unemployment, financial hardship, absolutely. And as administrators, as people who work in schools, we need to know which of our staff members lost a loved one to the virus. We need to know who had a significant change in their finances as a result of COVID-19. And the bottom line, what have surveys about suicide, what have they told us? The majority of Americans believe that suicide prevention needs to be a national priority. I can tell you, quite honestly, it has never been a national priority. Good news, 93% said they believe suicide can be prevented. I wish that number was 100%. But the next figure there basically says the majority of us were pretty uncomfortable with the topic. Nobody ever taught us what to look for, what to do. Now I teach doctoral students, and I always ask them, because some of them they're like in their early 20s, and I'll go, when did you learn something about suicide prevention? Did you learn anything at middle school? The answer is 100% no. Did you learn anything in high school about how to help yourself or how to help a friend? The answer is almost 100% no. So then I ask, where did you finally learn something? And they'll say, it wasn't until I took a psychology class. You know what my greatest hope would be? Future generations of Americans would learn the warning signs of suicide, how to get help for yourself or your friend, and they would learn it before they ever graduated from high school. Our Surgeon General very simply said, we got to talk about suicide prevention more, our homes, our schools, and our places of worship. And if you would take just a moment, that probably looks like, it could be a college student, it could be a first-year teacher, it could be your coworker, could maybe be a senior in high school. Looks like they're banging their head against the mirror. And they're basically saying, since the breakup, I can't study. I found out I'm losing my job. I'm not sure I want to live. Well, think for a moment, how would you respond? What would be a good response to this person? Maybe even take a moment and type it in the chat box. Having used this slide many times, here's what I sometimes hear. I'd say, oh, you'd never do that to your family. Please know the person thinking of suicide, they're trying to end what they believe is unendurable pain. They're not thinking of other people. Sometimes people say, I've talked to them about how I got through a difficult time. Really? What you need to do is simply listen. I'm here for you. There is help available. You are not the first person to ever feel this way. And we need to get comfortable with simply asking directly, are you thinking you want to kill yourself? I am here to help you. To be honest with you, I wished I'd have known enough to ask my father that question 46 years ago. I wish I would have simply asked. And we need to all become much more comfortable asking directly about suicide. And what are those warning signs? You've heard some of these before, but they're statements about death, dying, and suicide, either verbally, either written, could be in a poem, a kid is turning in for a class, could be something a staff member says about, no, I won't be around by then. Or you may be aware that some of your coworkers in schools are feeling hopeless, they're feeling trapped. Maybe they're giving away prized possessions. Maybe they're making out a will, or they have dramatic changes in their behavior. The vast majority of individuals who died by suicide exhibited one or more of those warning signs. So if I was listening today, I'd want somebody to talk about what protects us, what protects against suicide. This comes from the World Health Organization. By the way, Dr. Durkheim, more than 100 years ago, he said, when somebody dies by suicide, we need to think of it simply. We failed. We failed to have them connected to our workplace, our families, our neighborhoods, and our places of worship. And everybody needs problem solving and coping skills. We need access to mental health services. That means every employee in a school needs to know exactly how to access the employee assistance program. They need to know what benefits are available to them. And we all need to simply realize, when do we need to get help for ourselves or our friend or coworker? And religious involvement, connections are maybe the single greatest key to prevention. And those places of worship definitely work on connectedness. And, at the simplest level, you know what I'd love to ask every student in America tomorrow? Who is your go-to adult at school? Well, when do I get the most concerned? When a student can't tell me a go-to adult at school. And removing lethal means, to be honest, in America, that's pretty simply locking up the guns, locking the medicine cabinet. But in a project I'm working on for schools in Taiwan, basically it's charcoal. Charcoal is outlawed in Taiwan because that's what people burn there, and the fumes cause them to die by suicide. So we got to know our own communities, and we've got to know what lethal means. And of course, the bottom line, somebody is always going to say, but if you took away the lethal means, wouldn't they find another way? Wow. There's a website at Harvard, meansmatter.com, that says you take away the lethal means, the life is saved. It is absolutely that simple. So there are many challenges to suicide prevention in schools, many challenges to increasing mental health services in our schools. This is particularly problematic in rural areas. But again, the suicide is usually the result of untreated or undertreated mental illness, often in combination with adverse life experiences. We all simply need to know what to look for, what to do. We need to work as a team in our schools. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of stigma attached to seeking mental health treatment. That's why when I volunteered to help our troubled school staff, I always wanted them to come to see me, because that allowed us to keep this a little more confidential. And so many kids live in homes where guns are simply not stored correctly and safely. So, you know what I would argue? Mental health needs of school staff and students may be the greatest in our history, and we really need to pay attention to mental health. And by the way, being able to cope with the ups and downs of life, that helps us be a good worker, and it helps us be a good student. And please don't be afraid to just come right out and say, are you thinking you don't want to live? Are you thinking of suicide? And self-care plans for ourselves and for our students, our children, they're absolutely critical. We must continue to try to increase the mental health services available to employees and the services that are available to students. And it is so important that everybody knows simply how to access 24-hour crisis helplines. And it's actually pretty simple. Push the button on your smartphone. You tell Siri on an Apple phone, for example, she immediately says, may I connect you to the National Crisis Helpline? There's how to contact me. There's resources at the website for the office I direct for the university. I actually pride myself on trying to respond to every email I might receive. So there's the helpline that Siri would connect you with. But all you have to do is push the button and tell her. There is a 24-hour crisis text line. And I'm proud to tell you, some of my graduate students, they went through training. They volunteer. They answer crisis texts. So now I want to turn it back to Michelle, and she and I are going to talk about and hopefully answer questions that you might have today.
We have a lot of good ones, as you can imagine. They're coming in from all angles. So I would encourage everybody, use the Q&A feature. I said chat earlier, so I probably contributed to a little bit of the confusion there, but I'm getting them via text, and I'm getting, I actually already had a couple from our Safe and Sound School community as well, because people have seen parts of this presentation with Scott before. So where to start? One that really stuck out for me that came through was from Jill. Just like when you presented calm for us, Scott, it really resonates. It's super easy to remember. And actually, there are a lot of different things that the C, the A, the L, and the M can stand for. And Jill suggests that the A could also stand for accept because, well, first of all, it's hard for any of us to accept help. I think a lot of us in service to our communities are kind of type A, and kind of what I was talking about before with the oxygen mask, we are all very focused on other people first. So it's a little bit, it's not always intuitive, but for many of our leaders, it is especially difficult to accept help. I've seen it time and time again. I think perhaps there's a stigma around looking weak, right? And not, I don't need help. It's from my staff needs help. My parents need help. My students need help. My community, but I'm good. I'm fine. And that sort of hero complex is super dangerous, not just for our leaders who we need, especially during crisis, but it has that trickle down effect. So I would love you to talk a little bit about that, Scott.
Well, that is a great point, Michelle. And especially responding to school tragedies, what worked the best? When the principal would just cry, let their voice break, and so doing and showing a few emotions, it gives everybody permission for their emotions. And administrators, a lot of them worked all summer trying to be ready and trying to be, ahead of what was happening and figure out the best practices. And as you know, so many of the recommendations changed and so many things weren't exactly as they planned them to be over the summer. But, that administrator simply taking care of themselves. And you and I both know Frank DeAngelis, and we've heard him say something like, I got my counselor on speed dial. And really, if we could get administrators to overcome this stigma about accepting help and to realize by just showing the human person they are, that actually helps everybody else.
It really does. I know for my part, whenever I saw my leader do that, it just made a world of difference for me. It kind of, they're real, and they're modeling that being real. It kind of along the same lines, a great idea came in from Linda, and she talks about, this one's from Tony, hang on. This is about recommendations or examples of self-care plans. Tony says he's thinking of using upcoming PD time for teachers to create self-care plans. And I personally think that this is brilliant, like an exercise in creating a self-care plan. And perhaps Tony, as the leader, could even model and share a little bit of that. But do you know of any, can you recommend, or are there any examples of how you might format such a plan?
Well, I really shared, the 4 or 5 key areas that all this falls into. There, as everything, there's an app for that, of course. But, many of the apps would be things like meditation, mindfulness. You know, I think Tony's idea is actually brilliant, but it literally, like, if we could spend a few minutes at this Monday staff meeting, let's look at the physical things in terms of nutrition and exercise. And then maybe at the next meeting, let's look a little bit more at some of those other areas about stress and how to manage it. You know, schools, as you know, are very busy places, and it's not like we can spend hours and hours on this, but we could spend a few minutes. And an administrator who just said, you know, I found that by getting up a little early and exercising before I come to school, I have just a little bit better frame of mind. And let's talk about how everyone could build exercise into their day. And of course, I used to work in a district where we had various goals, and we had people on the volleyball court after school or walking around the track. And those activities, and especially getting the administrators to participate, really set a tone. And then obviously it's important for students to get exercise as well, and not just the kids that happen to be on the official sports team. It's like exercise really is one of the keys for everybody.
You know, and I like everybody, I think when the pandemic hit, we all just jumped into action mode. So I found myself not sleeping as well, just running around, you know, plugging the dam, hopping from school to school, group to group, with work, and not sleeping as well, not exercising, not eating as well. I started thinking of those things as kind of like luxury items. And that didn't work out very well for me. You know, I started burning out. I wasn't as focused, and I just wasn't as capable. So I think just pause and, you know, starting to build that into our days is so much. It's just so beneficial. It's hard to do, but it's so beneficial. But to the question of burnout, we have a great question about suggestions for school leaders in regard to staff burnout. It falls along the lines of everything we're talking about here. So, you know, we're in the midst of this pandemic, and we're not even halfway through, right? We're making some progress, but staff burnout is a reality. It has been for some time, and I think one of the hardest things is that this is a very ongoing crisis. You know, a lot of the crises that you and I address and talk about, they have sort of a finite time frame, and then we're into recovery. But with this pandemic, it just has such a long life cycle. And you know, some of the recovery work is happening now. Some of it we have to shelve because we're still problem solving. So you could talk a little bit about that burnout, Scott.
Well, one of the things I think is really important is for administrators to constantly be checking in with staff members and just letting them know how much their work is appreciated. That goes a long way. And I mean, one of our daughters has been teaching virtually now for the entire school year, trying to take care of her own 4 children while she teaches others. And she really needs her administrator to be continually just saying how much I appreciate all the efforts you're making and the extra time you spend responding to parents' phone calls, emails, their texts when they're confused about their children's assignment. So, and then this also goes to, there are a few superintendents around the country that basically, one in Ohio, I love this message. He was basically saying, like, okay, relax. We got this. We'll get through this. Don't worry quite so much about everybody meeting this academic standard right now. And that's a message that I frankly have not heard from enough school administrators, but I wish they got it from the Department of Education to the superintendents to, it's like, we will get the students, you know, we'll get them caught up at some point, but right now it's like, okay, to adjust a few expectations. And I think just having an administrator who listens, an administrator who asks, who checks in with you, how can I help? What else can we do to support you? And of course, I mean, there are scales out there that are designed to survey staff and find out what their level might be. But I think it's really important to just talk about it, and the administrator to be listening to all the challenges that staff members are facing.
Without a doubt, that check-in is so important. And I think, with our students and our community as well, as an elementary school teacher, the day began every day with a morning meeting. We'll check in, right? Everybody gets to talk a little bit about, how their morning went, what they had for breakfast, what's going on in their lives, that kind of a thing. And that is such a powerful way to help everybody kind of recalibrate and recenter before we start talking about some of our academic objectives and goals. But I love what you said about maybe just relaxing some of those expectations. And this may come as a surprise to a lot of folks because of my background, but I would go so far as to say I would even make them, kind of a byproduct or a nice to have at this time. Because what we really need to be focusing on is all of this stuff, the connection, helping one another through this, the kind of the self-care that is going to be so important for this entire journey.
Michelle, I think that fourth R is relationships.
There you go. Absolutely. There's a question that came in, Scott, about protective factors. You talked a little bit about protective factors in CALM while we're on the acronym, and a couple of the things that are in there are problem-solving skills and coping skills. So how can we be modeling and practicing and teaching and training problem-solving skills with our students and our staff, and for ourselves as well?
Well, one of the things I think is truly important is to find that shared time when a student or a child will actually talk to you. And I think sometimes as adults, we have a tendency to say, okay, if you do this, things will be better. And really, I tried with my own children and the students I counseled in schools to basically say, what are you thinking? What are your ideas to get through this? What are your thoughts on being able to manage this? And the more that we can really start to focus on that really at an early age. And I think it all goes back to, I want to underscore, when a kid feels unconditionally loved, it's literally like they have the feeling that I can get through anything. And when they understand there are certain things that they just need to go to an adult for help about, and that so many of the tragedies that I've responded to, in all honesty, they should have been prevented if a kid just would have gone to an adult about somebody's substance abuse or how they drove their car or they're playing around with a gun or their threats of suicide or homicide. And that's what's so frustrating. And like, I don't want to oversimplify, but if we could all just think about the importance of truly listening and connecting to another person. And that's hard because there's so much going on in our society, and maybe even at the simplest level in our families, we got to turn the technology off and sit around the table and have free and easy conversation. And hopefully that happens in schools too, where we put the desks in a circle and we just talk about something. And I always like to think with kids, hopefully they feel like I'm talking with them. We need to be careful that somebody doesn't think we're talking at them.
Well, Anna, it's very empowering, right? When you're involving staff and you're involving students in the process, you are problem solving together, and it makes some of those impossible things seem that much more solvable, doable, manageable. One last question. There's a lot of really great ones that maybe we can circle back to in a blog or with a follow-up, but this one is about, and this is a really, really important one, who can administrators, and I'll broaden it to leaders, go to when they need their buckets filled or their cups filled? Are there good resources? Are there good places? And this is a really tough one, right? Because our administrators do have, they can't lean on staff so much. They can't be leaning on the students. They can't be leaning on the community members. They still, you know, all the wonderful modeling we're talking about does great good. But where can they go to get the specific kind of help that they need? And I want to point out before I toss this to you, there's an incredible organization of principals out there. It's a small group. It's called the Principals Recovery Network. And a lot of the principals that we have worked with that have been involved in some kind of school-based crisis or tragedy, they have formed their own support group. And they just meet. It's a safe space. And they can speak freely and openly and in this trusted confidential space. And that is one example that I would point to Noelle for this great question. What would you say to that, Scott?
Well, I'm really glad to hear about the Principal Recovery Group. And it almost makes me think, you know, right now I'm sitting in the 6th biggest school district in America. Okay. So there's lots of principals. There's lots of assistant principals and deputy superintendents, assistant superintendents. It's literally like school district could sort of form their own recovery group. And I'd like to think that the assistant superintendent is going to the school, sitting down, close the door, talk to the principal, ask her how she's doing, how can I help, maybe put together something just for the administrators where on a day when the students aren't there, maybe the administrators could engage in some fun activities and somebody bring in the therapy dogs and the masseuse tables and just have them have a chance to totally relax and talk to other administrators. And, you know, the thing is, you're very aware of this, but what everybody goes through, it's so normal. And just to know I am not alone. I'm not the only one feeling all this responsibility, waking up in the middle of the night, the only one worrying, the only one replaying all these things. It's like once people understand you're not alone, and that's exactly what the recovery network you were talking about, it sounds like a great idea that could certainly really be implemented, especially in a big district like the one I sit in right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I know what it does for these folks, and I mean, I know how important even the staff room is for the staff, right? Just a place to let your hair down and laugh a little bit about the ridiculous things that are going on, and commiserate a little bit, and sure, problem solve, but to recognize that you're not alone is an incredibly powerful thing. So I am going to go ahead and pass back, I think, to either Shannon or Stephen to go ahead and close us out here. But I think we might need to come back to this conversation several more times. It's been amazing. Scott, thank you so much.
You're welcome. And I'm going to add that A is also going to mean acceptance.
So good.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, both of you, Scott and Michelle. I mean, as you saw by the outpouring of questions, it's a really important topic and resonated with a lot of people. So, we really appreciate your time here today and your expertise. And also, of course, thank you to our sponsor as well, Navigate 360. And, that said, I would also like to thank our attendees for joining us here today. For those of you who enjoyed our presentation, you'll be pleased to note there are many more upcoming web seminars like this one that are provided by District Administration, which is the leader in editorial coverage, as well as news, trends, and current issues in K through 12. Our wide range of readers here at DA subscribe for free to our magazine and stay up to date with us in print, in addition to the digital edition and our newsletters, including DA Daily, which is our daily newsletter, and DA Tech, which features the most relevant ed tech stories in K through 12, and of course, our web seminars like this one. Also, for those of you who would like to watch this web seminar again, or maybe for those of you who believe that the solutions that were provided here today in this web seminar would be helpful to your colleagues. You will be pleased to know that an archive recording of this web seminar will be available at the URL, which is provided here on your screen here. And all of you can expect to receive an email from our team later today from DA, or early tomorrow, I should say, which will include a link to all of the slides. And so with that, on behalf of District Administration, this is Stephen Blackburn. Thanks, everyone, and take care, be well, and stay safe. Thank you very much.